The first major break in the case came when investigators re-interviewed Donovan's crew. Firefighter Jessica Langley, who had been relatively new to the team at the time of the incident, revealed something she'd never mentioned before. "I always thought it was strange," she said in her statement. "Captain Donovan asked me to switch positions with him just minutes before the fire shifted. He'd never done that before, and it put him exactly where the fire would trap him. At the time I thought it was just bad luck, but now I wonder." Her statement cast a new shadow over Donovan's heroism. Had he deliberately placed himself in the path of danger? And if so, why? Lieutenant Jessica Langley had joined the Oak Ridge Fire Department just 18 months before the Clayton Mountain incident. At 29, she had transferred from a smaller department in Idaho, seeking more challenging firefighting opportunities and career advancement. Her personnel file showed excellent performance reviews, with particular commendation for her skills in wildland firefighting strategy. Though still establishing herself within the tight-knit Oak Ridge firefighting community, she had quickly earned respect for her competence and calm under pressure. The revelation about Donovan's position switch came during her third interview with Detective Martinez. In previous statements immediately following the incident and during the original investigation, Langley had never mentioned this critical detail. When Martinez pressed her about the omission, Langley's response revealed the complex dynamics that had influenced her silence. "You have to understand the culture," Langley explained, fingers nervously tracing the edge of her coffee cup in the interview room. Donovan was a legend in the department. After his death, questioning anything about his last actions felt like dishonoring his sacrifice. Everyone was devastated. I told myself it was probably nothing, just a coincidence or a tactical decision I didn't understand because I was still relatively new. According to Langley's revised statement, approximately 15 minutes before the wind shift that changed the fire's direction, Donovan had approached her at their position along the northwest firebreak. "We were working on different sections of the line," she recounted. "I was handling the eastern edge of our sector, which was closer to the established safety zone. Captain Donovan came over and said he wanted me to take his position on the western edge, saying something about wanting to check my technique on clearing brush. It made no sense at the time. I was certified in wildland tactics, and he'd never questioned my technique before. But you don't argue with your captain in the middle of a fire operation." The position swap meant that when the wind suddenly shifted, Donovan was in the section furthest from the safety zone and most vulnerable to being cut off. "Looking back," Langley said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, "it's like he knew exactly where to be to get separated from the team without putting anyone else at risk." Martinez requested a review of weather forecast data from the day of the fire. The National Weather Service records showed that while the major wind shift at 3:15 p.m. had indeed been unexpected, smaller atmospheric indicators observable to an experienced firefighter might have suggested the possibility of changing conditions. Captain Donovan was known for his almost intuitive understanding of fire behavior and weather patterns, noted Fire Chief William Hargrove when questioned about this angle. "If anyone could have anticipated that shift before our meteorologist picked it up, it would have been him." Further interviews with other crew members revealed additional inconsistencies. Firefighter Marcus Rodriguez remembered Donovan checking his watch repeatedly in the hour before the incident. Unusual behavior for a captain normally focused entirely on the fire and his crew during active operations. Equipment manager Terry Wallace noted that Donovan had requisitioned a replacement radio battery the morning of the fire, despite his primary battery being at full charge, an action that made little sense unless he anticipated needing extended communication capacity. Most tellingly, helicopter pilot Sandra Kim, who had conducted aerial surveys of the fire front that morning, recalled a brief exchange with Donovan during a water refill stop. "He asked me very specific questions about visibility in Sector Dakar, the firefighter's ghost-charred bones scattered across the forest floor, arranged in an unnatural pattern. A firefighter's badge, melted but still recognizable, glinting in the sun just feet away from the remains. The forest had kept it secret for 8 years until a hiker's dog uncovered what would become the most baffling case in Oak Ridge County's history. The sound of the dog's frantic barking echoed through the dense pine forest, drawing the attention of its owner, Trevor McMillan, who had been enjoying a peaceful Saturday hike along the less-traveled eastern path of Clayton Ridge. The dog, a 4-year-old border collie named Max, was known for his calm demeanor, making his sudden agitation all the more unusual. When McMillan finally caught up to Max, He found him pawing desperately at a patch of disturbed earth partially covered by fallen pine needles and forest debris. At first glance, McMillan thought Max had found an animal carcass, perhaps a deer that had died during the previous winter. It wasn't until he bent down to pull his dog away that he noticed the distinctive shape of what was unmistakably a human finger bone. The discovery sent a chill down McMillan's spine, a visceral reaction that he would later describe to detectives as, like someone walking over my grave. Reaching for his phone with trembling hands, McMillan dialed 911, initiating a chain of events that would unravel 8 years of carefully constructed deception and shake the foundations of Oak Ridge County's most trusted institutions. The remains belonged to Michael Donovan, a 42-year-old fire captain from Oak Ridge Fire Department, who had been declared dead after the devastating Clayton Mountain wildfire of 2017. The discovery was made by amateur hiker Trevor McMillan, whose border collie had wandered off the trail and began frantically digging at the forest floor, revealing what would later be identified as human bones. Within 45 minutes of McMillan's 911 call, the serene hiking trail had transformed into a buzzing crime scene. County Sheriff Lisa Rodriguez arrived first, quickly establishing a perimeter before the forensic team could reach the remote location. "I've been in law enforcement for 22 years, Sheriff Rodriguez would later tell reporters, and there was something immediately off about this scene. What caught her attention was not just the presence of human remains in an area that had been thoroughly searched years ago, but the deliberate arrangement of the bones. They weren't scattered haphazardly as would be expected from animal disturbance or natural decomposition. Instead, they formed what appeared to be a rough circle, with the skull placed precisely in the center, a detail that would haunt investigators for months to come. Even more puzzling was the firefighter's badge, which had clearly been exposed to intense heat yet showed no signs of the same soil accumulation as the bones. It was almost as if someone had placed it there recently, noted Rodriguez in her initial report, like they wanted it to be found. As the forensic team meticulously documented and collected evidence over the next 6 hours, the gravity of the discovery became increasingly apparent. The badge, bearing the number 7734, belonged to Michael Donovan, a beloved fire captain who had been considered a hero in Oak Ridge County since his presumed death in the Clayton Mountain fire. His loss had devastated the tight-knit firefighting community and left his teenage daughter without a father. Now, 8 years later, the mysterious circumstances of his remains' discovery threatened to unravel the carefully preserved narrative of his heroic sacrifice. Michael Donovan had been the pride of Oak Ridge County. A decorated firefighter with 20 years of service, he'd saved 37 lives throughout his career. Colleagues described him as methodical, fearless, and deeply committed to his community. At home, he was a devoted father to his teenage daughter, Chloe, coaching her soccer team every weekend and helping her with science projects late into the night. "Dad always told me that helping others wasn't a job. It was the only thing that made sense in this world," Chloe had said at his memorial service. The night before the Clayton Mountain fire, Michael had called his mother, telling her about his plans to take Chloe camping after fire season ended. "He sounded more excited about life than I'd heard him in years," his mother later told investigators. "That's what makes all of this so impossible to accept." Those who knew Donovan spoke of a man who seemed to have been born to be a firefighter. His grandfather had served in the same department, creating a legacy that Donovan had embraced from childhood. Elementary school reports showed that as early as 3rd grade, young Michael had declared his intention to follow in his grandfather's footsteps. By high school, he was volunteering at the station, washing trucks and helping with equipment maintenance. His classmates remembered him as quiet but confident, someone who seemed to have a clear sense of purpose in a time when most teenagers were still searching for direction. After graduating with honors from Oak Ridge High School in 1993, Donovan enrolled in the county's firefighter training program, finishing at the top of his class. His instructors noted his exceptional aptitude for understanding fire behavior, a skill that would later make his actions during the Clayton Mountain incident all the more baffling to investigators. "Michael could read a fire better than anyone I've ever trained," said retired Captain James Whitaker. "He had an almost uncanny ability to predict how flames would move, which made him both effective and safe. The idea that he could be caught off guard by a sudden wind shift never sat right with me. Even back then, Donovan's rise through the ranks was steady and earned. He became a lieutenant by age 30 and a captain by 35, accumulating commendations and the respect of his peers along the way. The walls of his modest home were adorned with certificates of recognition and photographs of rescues, though colleagues noted he rarely spoke of his achievements. He wasn't in it for the glory, said Lieutenant Raymond Chen, who served under Donovan for 5 years. Mike believed that when you signed up to be a firefighter, you were making a promise to the community. He took that promise seriously. His personal life had seen both joy and tragedy. In 2002, he married his high school sweetheart, Catherine Miller, and their daughter Chloe was born the following year. The marriage had been solid for nearly a decade until Catherine was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer in 2012. Despite Donovan's desperate efforts to find experimental treatments, flying Catherine to specialists across the country, she succumbed to the disease just 14 months after her diagnosis. Friends described the period after Catherine's death as the darkest time in Donovan's life. He took a 3-month leave of absence from the department, during which concerns about his mental health began to surface. Department records indicated that he had been required to undergo psychological evaluation before returning to active duty, though the results of those evaluations were sealed as part of his personal file. By all accounts, Donovan emerged from his grief with an even deeper commitment to his work and his daughter. Single parenthood wasn't easy, especially with the demanding schedule of a fire captain, but he restructured his life to ensure Chloe remained his priority. He declined several opportunities for advancement that would have meant longer hours or relocating to larger departments in neighboring counties. Being a good father mattered more to him than any promotion, said his mother, Eleanor Donovan. After Catherine died, he became even more protective of Chloe. Sometimes I worried he was almost too focused on her, like he was terrified of losing her too. This protective instinct would later factor heavily into theories about Donovan's disappearance. Was he a devoted father who abandoned his child, or had his overprotective nature driven him to extreme measures? In the months leading up to the Clayton Mountain fire, several colleagues noticed subtle changes in Donovan's behavior. He became more reserved, spending increasing amounts of time reviewing department protocols and studying maps of the county's wildland areas. At the time, these actions were attributed to his conscientious nature, particularly given that fire season predictions that year were unusually severe. In retrospect, investigators would wonder if these were signs of a man meticulously planning something beyond routine preparedness. As Detective Diana Martinez would later observe while reviewing the case files, the picture that emerges is of a man who was either extraordinarily dedicated to his profession or someone building an elaborate cover for whatever he was really planning. The line between obsessive preparation and calculated deception can be remarkably thin. The official report stated that Captain Donovan had led his crew into the northwest section of Clayton Mountain when the wind suddenly shifted, creating a fire tornado that trapped him. Radio transmissions captured his final words: "Fall back to position Delta. I'm cut off. Save the crew." His team had tried desperately to reach him, but the intensity of the flames made rescue impossible. When the fire was finally contained 3 days later, search teams found no remains in the burn zone, not unusual in fires that reached temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. After a week of searching, Michael Donovan was declared dead, his heroism celebrated across the state. A memorial fountain was erected in the town square, where each year on the anniversary of his death, fellow firefighters would place their badges in the water in his honor. But was it all built on a lie? Could a decorated fire captain have engineered his own death? The Clayton Mountain wildfire began on July 17, 2017, sparked by a lightning strike during an unusually dry summer. Initially contained to a remote area of the mountain, the fire seemed manageable until shifting weather conditions on July 19th caused it to explode in size, threatening several rural communities along the mountain's base. Multiple fire crews from throughout the county were deployed, with Captain Donovan's team assigned to establish a fire break along the northwest ridge, an area he knew well from previous firefighting operations and personal hiking trips. Weather reports from that day showed clear conditions until approximately 3:15 p.m., when an unexpected dry cold front moved through the region, bringing wind gusts up to 45 miles per hour. According to the official incident report, these sudden winds created what firefighters call a blow-up, a rapid, explosive growth in fire intensity and spread. At 3:27 p.m., Donovan reported over the radio that his team was falling back to their designated safety zone, labeled as Position Delta on their operational maps. 2 minutes later came another transmission. Wind shift. Fires jumping the line. Move to... The transmission cut out briefly before resuming with what would become Donovan's famous last words, directing his crew to safety while indicating he had become separated from them. The surviving members of Donovan's crew provided consistent accounts of the chaotic moments that followed. Lieutenant Jessica Langley, who had taken command after Donovan's separation, described visibility dropping to near zero as smoke engulfed their position. We could hear Mike's voice on the radio, but we couldn't see more than a few feet in front of us, she recounted in her statement. He kept telling us to keep moving toward the evacuation point, that he would find another way out. The last confirmed transmission from Donovan came at 3:38 p.m. I've got fire on 3 sides. Trying to make it to the creek bed. No further communications were received. When the fire was finally contained 4 days later, a search operation was launched. The area where Donovan was last believed to be had experienced what fire scientists call extreme burn conditions, with temperatures potentially exceeding 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. In such conditions, human remains can be completely consumed, leaving little or no trace. After 7 days of increasingly desperate searching, with no sign of Donovan and with dangerous hotspots still flaring throughout the burn zone, the operation was reluctantly converted from rescue to recovery. On August 2, 2017, with his body still not located, Michael Donovan was officially declared dead. The loss devastated the community. Over 1,200 people attended Donovan's memorial service, including firefighters from as far away as Canada who came to honor a fallen brother. Governor Eleanor Marston declared August 10th as Michael Donovan Day, a day to recognize the sacrifice of all first responders. The Oak Ridge Town Council approved funds for a memorial fountain in the town square, featuring a bronze statue of a firefighter with outstretched hands. The plaque read, "In memory of Captain Michael Donovan, who gave his life so others might live." July 19, 2017. Each year since, on the anniversary of his death, a solemn ceremony was held where firefighters would place their badges in the fountain's pool before retrieving them, symbolizing the eternal bond between the living and the fallen. Chloe Donovan, only 14 when she lost her father, was taken in by her grandparents. Interviewed a year after the tragedy, she spoke of her determination to honor her father's legacy by pursuing a career in emergency services. "He always taught me that when others run away from danger, we run toward it," she told the Oak Ridge Gazette. "I want to live my life by that principle." Photos from that interview showed a solemn teenager wearing her father's watch, which had been recovered from his locker at the fire station, a touchstone to the parent she had lost. For 8 years, the story of Michael Donovan's heroic last stand remained unquestioned, his name becoming synonymous with sacrifice and duty in firefighter training programs throughout the state, until a border collie's curiosity uncovered bones that should never have been there, in a pattern no natural process could explain. And suddenly, everything about the legend of Michael Donovan was called into question. The discovery of Donovan's remains nearly 8 miles from where he was last reported raised immediate questions. Why were his bones found so far from his last known position? The coroner's office confirmed through dental records that the remains belonged to Michael Donovan, but something was wrong. The bones showed no evidence of the intense burning one would expect from someone caught in a wildfire. Instead, they exhibited signs of exposure to much lower heat over a longer period. Was someone trying to mimic fire damage? Even more perplexing, the bones appeared to have been moved and arranged at the discovery site. Who would disturb a firefighter's remains, and why? County Medical Examiner Dr. Eliza Ramsey received the remains at 7:45 p.m. on the day of discovery. An experienced forensic pathologist with 18 years in the field, Dr. Ramsey had seen countless cases of burn victims throughout her career, including those from structure fires, car accidents, and wildfires. But the condition of these bones immediately struck her as anomalous. In high-intensity wildfire victims, we typically see calcination of the bone, a chalky white appearance caused by the complete combustion of organic material at temperatures above 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, she explained in her preliminary report. These remains showed evidence of charring, a blackened appearance indicating exposure to lower temperatures, typically around 700 to 900 degrees, for an extended period. This discrepancy alone was enough to raise serious questions about the circumstances of Donovan's death. The Clayton Mountain Fire had been classified as an extreme intensity event, with flame temperatures estimated well above the threshold for bone calcination. If Donovan had indeed perished in that fire as reported, his remains should have exhibited very different characteristics. Further examination revealed another troubling detail. The pattern of charring was inconsistent across different bones, with some showing more extensive damage than others. In a natural fire event, we would expect relatively uniform exposure based on body position and surrounding fuel sources, noted Dr. Ramsey. The differential charring pattern observed here is more consistent with deliberate application of heat to specific areas post-mortem. In other words, someone appeared to have selectively burned the remains, perhaps in an attempt to simulate fire damage. The most disturbing finding came when Dr. Ramsey's team began reconstructing the skeleton. Several small bones from the hands and feet were missing entirely, while others showed evidence of tool marks consistent with cutting or sawing. These marks are definitively not the result of animal scavenging or natural decomposition, the report stated. They indicate deliberate human manipulation of the remains after death. Dental records confirmed the identity as Michael Donovan, with what initially appeared to be absolute certainty. His distinctive dental work, including a crown on the upper right first molar and a specific pattern of fillings, matched perfectly with the records on file with his family dentist, Dr. Kenneth Marshall. The dental identification seemed to be the one solid fact in an increasingly perplexing case. Meanwhile, at the discovery site, the forensic investigation continued under the direction of senior crime scene analyst Tori Winters. With 22 years of experience processing complex crime scenes, Winters approached the site with methodical precision. Using ground-penetrating radar, her team scanned the surrounding area to determine if additional remains or evidence might be buried nearby. What they found deepened the mystery further. Approximately 6 feet from where the main concentration of bones had been discovered, radar indicated a small metallic object buried roughly 8 inches below the surface. Careful excavation revealed a standard-issue Firefighter's flashlight, severely damaged by heat but with traces of a name etched on the handle: Donovan. The position of the flashlight made no sense in the context of a body that had allegedly burned where it fell. It was too far from the main remains and buried at a depth that suggested deliberate placement rather than natural settling processes. The arrangement of the bones themselves presented another puzzle. While initial reports had described them as being in a rough circle, closer analysis by Winters' team revealed a more specific pattern. The long bones of the arms and legs had been arranged in a cross-like formation, with the skull placed at the intersection. This level of deliberate positioning eliminated any possibility that the arrangement was coincidental or the result of animal activity. Someone took time and care to place these remains in this specific configuration, Winters noted in her report. This wasn't a rushed job. It was methodical, almost ceremonial. Soil analysis from beneath and around the remains yielded perhaps the most significant clue. Trace amounts of accelerant, specifically a commercial fire starter compound commonly used by forestry services for controlled burns, were detected in soil samples. This particular accelerant contained a chemical marker specific to batches used by the Oak Ridge County Fire Department, the very department where Donovan had served. It was a compound that Donovan would have had ready access to, raising the chilling possibility that he had somehow been involved in staging his own remains. As these forensic details emerged, Detective Diana Martinez began building a timeline of events that contradicted the official narrative of Donovan's heroic death. If the remains found in the forest were indeed his, then how did they come to be there, 8 miles from his last reported position? And if they weren't his, despite the dental match, then whose were they? And where was Michael Donovan? As investigators reopened the case, they discovered Donovan's service radio in the soil beneath where his badge was found. When forensic technicians examined it, they made a startling discovery. The radio had been manually disabled, not destroyed in the fire. The power switch had been deliberately turned to the off position. Why would a firefighter in mortal danger turn off his only lifeline? Or had someone else turned it off after his death? The questions multiplied faster than answers could be found. The recovery of Donovan's service radio represented a pivotal moment in the investigation. Standard operating procedure for Oak Ridge County firefighters required that radios remain on at all times during active fire operations, even if abandoned during emergency evacuations. These radios were designed with backup battery systems specifically to ensure that locator signals could help recovery teams find injured or deceased personnel. For Donovan's radio to be found in the off position contradicted both protocol and survival instinct. The radio itself, a Hamilton Firecom 550X model, had serial number FC7734ODC, matching department records of the device issued to Donovan. When Senior Electronics Forensic Examiner Raj Patel received the radio at the County Crime Lab, his first step was to attempt data recovery from the device's internal memory. Modern Firefighter radios record basic transmission data, including timestamps and duration of communications, providing a potential digital trail of Donovan's final moments. What Patel discovered sent ripples through the investigation team. The radio shows evidence of being manually powered down at 3:42 p.m. on July 19, 2017, Patel's report stated. This is approximately 4 minutes after Captain Donovan's final recorded transmission. Even more significant was Patel's next finding. Prior to shutdown, the radio's GPS tracking function was manually disabled at 3:40 p.m. through the device's menu system. This sequence of actions required multiple deliberate steps, not something that would happen accidentally, especially not during a life-threatening emergency. The implications were profound. Either Captain Donovan had deliberately disabled his tracking device and turned off his radio, actions that made no sense for someone genuinely trapped and seeking rescue, or someone else had manipulated the device after he was separated from it. Neither scenario aligned with the official story of his heroic last stand. Physical examination of the radio revealed additional anomalies. While the exterior showed heat damage consistent with exposure to high temperatures, the internal components were largely intact. The damage pattern is inconsistent with exposure to wildfire conditions, Patel noted. It appears more consistent with targeted application of heat to the exterior casing only. This finding aligned with Dr. Ramsey's observations about the selective burning patterns on the recovered bones. Perhaps most damning was the discovery of a partial fingerprint on the interior battery compartment, a location that would normally only be accessed during battery replacement, a maintenance task typically performed at the station, not during active firefighting. The print was partial and degraded but sufficient for comparison analysis. When run against department personnel records, it returned a match to none other than Michael Donovan himself. The timing implications were staggering. If Donovan had opened the battery compartment, it likely occurred after his supposed death in the fire. Meanwhile, Detective Martinez had been conducting interviews with personnel from neighboring fire districts who had participated in the search operations following the Clayton Mountain fire. Battalion Chief Gregory Sorensen from the West Ridge Fire Department recalled something that hadn't seemed significant at the time, but now took on new meaning. We were assigned to search Sector 7, which included the creek bed where Donovan had reportedly been trying to reach, Sorensen told Martinez. On our third day of searching, we found a boot print in some mud near the water's edge. It matched the tread pattern of standard-issue Oak Ridge firefighter boots. We reported it, but since it was a common boot type used by many searchers, it wasn't flagged as significant. Martinez requested the GPS coordinates of this boot print discovery and overlaid them with a map of the search operations. What emerged was a potential escape route, a path leading away from the burn zone, following the creek for approximately 2 miles, before intersecting with a seldom-used Forest Service road. This road, in turn, connected to Highway 23 roughly 5 miles from the town of Millridge, a small community where a stranger might not attract much attention. Had Donovan somehow survived the fire and deliberately made his way out of the search area? To test this theory, Martinez obtained cell tower data for the region covering the 2 days following the fire. The records showed an interesting anomaly. At 2:17 a.m. on July 21, 2017, a burner phone purchased 3 weeks earlier at a convenience store in Oak Ridge briefly connected to a tower near Millridge. The phone was used for a single call lasting approximately 90 seconds to another burner phone activated the same day. After this call, neither phone ever connected to network towers again. The purchase of the first phone, captured on store security footage, showed a man in a baseball cap whose height and build were consistent with Donovan's, though his face remained obscured from the camera angle. The pieces were beginning to form a disturbing picture, evidence suggesting deliberate radio disabling, a potential escape route, and mysterious burner phone activity in the vicinity shortly after the fire. But the central question remained unanswered. If Michael Donovan had engineered his own disappearance, why were his remains, confirmed by dental records, found 8 years later in a forest clearing? The contradiction seemed irreconcilable, until Dr. A. Ramsey made another discovery that would shatter the foundation of the entire case. During a re-examination of the cranial fragments, Dr. Ramsey noticed microscopic inconsistencies in the dental work compared to the records provided. While the overall pattern of restorations matched Donovan's records, her amended report stated, slight variations in the composite material used for the fillings suggested they were not performed by the same dentist. This observation prompted a deeper dive into Donovan's dental history. Dr. Kenneth Marshall, Donovan's dentist of record, was brought in for questioning. When presented with high-resolution photographs of the dental work found in the remains, Dr. Marshall became visibly uncomfortable. "These aren't my work," he finally admitted after prolonged questioning. "The occlusal approach on the molars isn't my technique." When pressed further about the accuracy of the records he had provided, Marshall's composure crumbled entirely. "Michael came to me about 2 months before the fire," he confessed. "He said he needed updated dental records for a department insurance policy. I didn't think anything of it at the time." With this revelation, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Had Donovan somehow altered his dental records in anticipation of needing to fake his own death? And if the remains weren't his, whose were they? The radio, the badge, the deliberate arrangement of bones, all pointed to an elaborate staging. But staging required planning, resources, and above all, motivation. What could drive a decorated firefighter to such extremes? The first major break in the case came when investigators re-interviewed Donovan's crew. Firefighter Jessica Langley, who had been relatively new to the team at the time of the incident, revealed something she'd never mentioned before. "I always thought it was strange," she said in her statement. "Captain Donovan asked me to switch positions with him just minutes before the fire shifted. He'd never done that before, and it put him exactly where the fire would trap him. At the time, I thought it was just bad luck, but now I wonder." Her statement cast a new shadow over Donovan's heroism. Had he deliberately placed himself in the path of danger? And if so, why? As detectives dug deeper into Donovan's personal life, they discovered a series of unexplained cash withdrawals totaling $17,000 in the 3 months leading up to the fire. The money had never been recovered, nor had it been mentioned in the initial investigation. His financial records showed no unusual debts, no gambling habits, nothing that would explain the need for cash. What was he preparing for? Even more peculiar, Donovan had updated his will just 2 weeks before the fire, leaving everything to his daughter Chloe, with specific instructions that she would receive access to a safety deposit box on her 25th birthday. By the time of the new investigation, Chloe was only 23. What was in that box, and why did Donovan want to ensure his daughter would receive it years after his death? The investigation took an unexpected turn when Detective Diana Martinez, the lead investigator, received an anonymous email containing only a screenshot of Donovan's bank records from 4 days before the fire. The records showed a payment to a company called Phoenix Consulting Services. When Martinez traced the company, she found it was a shell corporation with connections to individuals known for providing new identities to clients wishing to disappear. Was Donovan planning his own disappearance all along? And if so, whose remains were found in the forest? The forensic evidence was conclusive. The dental records matched. Had someone tampered with Donovan's dental records before his death? Chloe Donovan had built a life around preserving her father's legacy. Now 23, she had followed in his footsteps, working as an emergency medical technician while studying fire science. When detectives approached her with their suspicions, she reacted with understandable anger and disbelief. "My father died a hero," she insisted. "How dare you suggest otherwise?" But as evidence mounted that her father might have engineered his own death, Chloe began to question everything she thought she knew. Had the man who taught her about honor and service been living a double life? The possibility devastated her, but she agreed to help investigators, offering access to her father's personal effects that she had kept stored in her apartment. Among those effects was a journal Donovan had kept during his last year. Most entries were mundane, notes about work schedules, Chloe's soccer games, and home maintenance tasks. But tucked between pages was a business card for a marina in Costa Rica, with a phone number handwritten on the back. When investigators called the number, no one answered, but within an hour, the phone associated with the number was disconnected. Someone was watching. Was Donovan still alive, monitoring the investigation from afar? The investigation's most shocking revelation came 16 months after the discovery of the remains. A lab technician reviewing the DNA analysis noticed something that had been overlooked. While the dental records matched Michael Donovan perfectly, the DNA from the bone marrow showed subtle inconsistencies with samples from Donovan's hairbrush and toothbrush that had been preserved by Chloe. The differences weren't enough to flag in routine testing, but indicated the remains might belong to a close relative rather than Donovan himself. Did Captain Donovan have a relative no one knew about? Or had someone gone to extraordinary lengths to fake his death using a genetic relative's body? The case broke open when Detective Martinez received a tip from a nurse at Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital. 8 months before the Clayton Mountain fire, the hospital had treated a John Doe, a homeless man suffering from late-stage cancer, who shared an unusual physical characteristic with Michael Donovan, a rare congenital fusion of 2 vertebrae in the lower spine. This fusion was noted in both Donovan's medical records and in the remains found in the forest. The hospital had no record of the John Doe's fate after discharge, and the attending physician remembered Donovan visiting the ward several times, apparently to check on other firefighters injured in a warehouse fire. Had Donovan somehow obtained the John Doe's body after his death, preserving it to use later in his elaborate disappearance? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence increasingly pointed to an elaborate deception. 17 months into the reinvestigation, Chloe Donovan was scrolling through Instagram when she froze. In the background of a tourist's photo taken at a small cafe in Puerto Viejo, Costa Rica, she spotted a face she would recognize anywhere: her father's. Though older, with gray hair and a beard, the man had the same distinctive scar above his right eyebrow that her father had received during a rescue operation 10 years earlier. The photo had been posted 3 days before. Michael Donovan, or someone who looked remarkably like him, was alive in Costa Rica. Could this be real? Or was her mind playing tricks, showing her what she desperately wanted to see? Chloe immediately forwarded the photo to Detective Martinez, who ran it through facial recognition software. The results came back with an 87% match to Michael Donovan's driver's license photo. Not conclusive proof, but enough to warrant further investigation. Working with Costa Rican authorities, Martinez arranged surveillance of the cafe. For 2 weeks there was no sign of the Donovan look-alike. Then, on the 15th day, a man matching his description arrived, speaking fluent Spanish with the cafe owner. Costa Rican police followed him to a modest house on the outskirts of town, where he appeared to live alone. The man used the name Gabriel Vega and had Costa Rican identification papers dating back 5 years. As investigators built their case, another piece of the puzzle emerged. 2 months before the Clayton Mountain fire, the fire department's evidence room had reported a break-in. Nothing appeared to have been stolen, but among the items stored there were dental x-rays of all department personnel, including Donovan's. Had he accessed his own records to plan his disappearance, perhaps altering them to match the John Doe who would become his body double? Detective Martinez and 2 Costa Rican officers approached Gabriel Vega's house on a humid Tuesday morning. When they knocked, the man answered immediately as if he had been expecting them. He didn't resist, didn't express surprise. He simply nodded and said, "I always knew this day would come. I just hoped Chloe would be older when it did." After 8 years, Michael Donovan had been found alive. Back in the United States, as news of Donovan's discovery spread, the community that had mourned him reacted with shock and anger. The firefighters who had risked their lives trying to save him felt betrayed. The town that had memorialized him felt foolish. And at the center of it all was Chloe, trying to reconcile the father she had idolized with the man who had abandoned her, leaving her to grieve while he built a new life thousands of miles away. During his initial questioning in Costa Rica, Donovan remained largely silent, answering only basic questions about his identity. Yes, he was Michael Donovan. Yes, he had faked his death, but he refused to explain why until he could speak to his daughter. "There are things Chloe needs to hear from me directly," he insisted. "After that, I'll tell you everything." The Costa Rican authorities agreed to extradite Donovan to face charges in the United States, including fraud, obstruction of justice, and mishandling of human remains. As Donovan awaited extradition in a Costa Rican holding facility, Detective Martinez focused on answering the most troubling question: whose remains had been found in the forest? DNA analysis eventually confirmed what they had suspected. The bones belonged to the John Doe from Oak Ridge Memorial Hospital. Hospital records showed he had died of natural causes 2 days after Donovan's last visit to the ward. The body had been claimed by a cousin, a man whose description matched Donovan wearing glasses and different clothes. The elaborate nature of the deception was becoming clear, but its purpose remained mysterious. What could drive a decorated firefighter to such extremes? The mystery deepened when investigators discovered a storage unit rented under Michael Donovan's name a week before the Clayton Mountain fire. Inside, they found newspaper clippings about 3 unsolved arson cases from neighboring counties. Each fire had similar characteristics, expertly set to maximize damage while minimizing the risk of casualties. The most recent had occurred just 1 month before Donovan's disappearance. Had Donovan been investigating these fires on his own, or was there a darker possibility that he had set them himself? When Chloe finally agreed to visit her father in detention following his extradition, their meeting was tense and emotional. "Why?" was all she could ask through tears. Donovan's explanation was not what anyone expected. "I did it to protect you," he told her. "There are people who would have hurt you to get to me." According to Donovan, he had uncovered evidence that several recent fires in the region had been deliberately set by a group with connections to local government officials. When he had taken his findings to his superior, Fire Chief William Hargrove, he was told to drop the investigation. "Some things are better left alone," Hargrove had allegedly told him. When Donovan persisted, he began receiving anonymous threats, including a photo of Chloe at her high school with a target drawn over her face. Donovan claimed he had faked his death as the only way to ensure his daughter's safety, while he gathered evidence against the arson ring from outside the country. He had planned to return once he had enough proof to ensure convictions and Chloe's safety. "I never meant to hurt you," he told his daughter. "Everything I did was to keep you safe." Was this the truth, or an elaborate lie to justify abandoning his responsibilities? Chloe wasn't sure what to believe. The investigation into Donovan's claims about the arson ring led to a surprising development. Fire Chief William Hargrove, who had given the eulogy at Donovan's memorial service, abruptly retired when news of Donovan's discovery broke. When detectives searched Hargrove's home, they found offshore bank accounts containing over $2 million, far more than a fire chief could accumulate legitimately. They also found encrypted communications with a local property developer named Victor Chambers, whose company had purchased several properties shortly after they were damaged in the suspicious fires Donovan had been investigating. Was this the conspiracy Donovan had claimed to uncover? As the case expanded to include potential arson and corruption charges, investigators made another disturbing discovery. The anonymous email that had first led them to Phoenix Consulting Services had been sent from an internet cafe in Costa Rica, just 3 blocks from Donovan's residence. Had he orchestrated his own discovery? And if so, why now, after 8 years of successful hiding? The answer came from the contents of the safety deposit box Donovan had left for Chloe to open on her 25th birthday. With the investigation ongoing, a judge granted permission to open it early. Inside was a USB drive containing videos, documents, and photos, comprehensive evidence of the arson-for-profit scheme Donovan had claimed to be investigating. The files documented meetings between Chief Hargrove, developer Victor Chambers, and several local officials planning fires that would clear properties for redevelopment. Most damning was a video of Hargrove accepting an envelope of cash from Chambers while discussing the next target, a historical building that had been deemed too costly to renovate. Also in the safety deposit box was a letter to Chloe, dated the day before the Clayton Mountain fire. "If you're reading this," Donovan had written, "either I'm dead or I've had to disappear. Either way, I've failed in what I set out to do. The evidence on this drive is everything I've gathered about the fires. I was going to take it to the federal authorities, but I've been warned that there are people in those agencies who are also involved. Trust no one until you understand how far this goes. I love you more than anything in this world. That's the one truth you can always count on." The evidence was compelling, but it raised more questions than it answered. If Donovan had already compiled this evidence before his disappearance, why flee at all? Why not simply send the drive anonymously to multiple news outlets? And why arrange to have his discovery triggered now, rather than waiting for Chloe to open the box on her 25th birthday, as he had originally planned? The final piece of the puzzle fell into place when investigators interviewed Victor Chambers. Facing multiple federal charges, Chambers agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration during sentencing. According to Chambers, the arson ring had indeed existed, and Donovan had gotten too close to exposing it. But contrary to Donovan's claim that he fled to protect Chloe, Chambers revealed that Donovan had been paid $500,000 to stage his own death and disappear. "He wasn't running from us," Chambers explained. "He was working with us. Then something changed. He got cold feet or grew a conscience. He stopped responding to our messages about 6 months after he disappeared. We figured he'd decided to really vanish, take our money and run." When confronted with Chambers' statement, Donovan's carefully constructed narrative began to unravel. Bank records confirmed a transfer of $500,000 to an offshore account in Panama, linked to Donovan just 3 days after the Clayton Mountain fire. The heroic firefighter turned whistleblower was revealed to be something else entirely. A man who had taken a bribe to disappear, then had an attack of conscience. The evidence he had gathered hadn't been collected before his disappearance, but afterward, perhaps as a form of insurance or redemption. For Chloe, this revelation was more devastating than her father's death had been. The man she had grieved for, whose moral example had shaped her life, had not only abandoned her but had done so for money. The father who had returned to her wasn't a hero in hiding, but a criminal trying to rewrite his own story. How could she reconcile the father she remembered with the man now revealed? As the case proceeded to trial, Michael Donovan pleaded guilty to multiple charges, including fraud and conspiracy. In exchange for his testimony against Hargrove, Chambers, and the others involved in the arson ring, he received a reduced sentence of 10 years. During his sentencing hearing, he finally spoke publicly about his actions. "I've told many lies," he admitted, "but the biggest was the one I told myself, that I could take the money and still be the man my daughter thought I was. I failed as a firefighter, as a citizen, and most importantly, as a father. Nothing I can say will change that, but maybe my testimony can help bring some justice to the community I betrayed." The trials of Hargrove, Chambers, and 7 other conspirators revealed the full extent of the arson scheme, which had resulted in 3 deaths that had previously been ruled accidental. The corruption had reached into the county prosecutor's office and the state fire marshal's bureau, leading to a complete overhaul of both agencies. The case became a landmark in firefighter ethics training across the country. For the community of Oak Ridge County, the revelations brought a mixture of closure and fresh wounds. The memorial fountain dedicated to Michael Donovan's heroism was removed from the town square, replaced by a simpler monument honoring the true victims of the arson conspiracy. The fire department established new oversight procedures to ensure such corruption could never again take root. And what of Chloe Donovan? After her father's sentencing, she resigned from her position as an EMT and withdrew from her fire science program. For months, she refused all contact with her father, returning his letters unopened. She changed her last name and moved to another state, trying to build a life untainted by her father's betrayal. But the story doesn't end there. 2 years into Michael Donovan's sentence, Chloe finally agreed to visit him in prison. Their conversation, according to prison records, lasted 5 hours. What was said remains private, but afterward Chloe began monthly visits. She also returned to emergency services. Though not as a firefighter, she completed nursing school and began working in an emergency room, still drawn to helping others in crisis. When asked by a journalist why she had reconnected with her father despite his betrayal, Chloe gave a response that surprised many. "People think this story is about a hero who turned out to be a villain," she said, "but it's really about something more complicated. A flawed man who made a terrible choice, then spent years trying to undo it. I'm not saying what he did was right, or even forgivable, but I've learned that people aren't just one thing. My father taught me about courage and service long before he taught me about weakness and redemption. I'm trying to hold on to the lessons worth keeping." The case of Michael Donovan, firefighter, father, criminal, and whistleblower, remains one of the most complex in Oak Ridge County history. It has been studied by law enforcement agencies, ethics committees, and psychology researchers, each finding different lessons in its tangled web of heroism, corruption, betrayal, and possible redemption. As for Michael Donovan himself, he continues to serve his sentence, working as part of the prison's firefighting program. In a system that emphasizes punishment over rehabilitation, it represents a small form of redemption, using the skills that once defined his life to give something back to society. Whether it will ever be enough to balance the scales of his betrayal is a question only time can answer. The charred bones discovered in the forest set in motion a case that would eventually expose corruption, reaching into every corner of Oak Ridge County. What began as the story of one man's betrayal revealed a system where public safety was sacrificed for private profit. The investigation led to the conviction of 12 people, the restructuring of the fire department, and millions of dollars in restitution to the victims of the arson conspiracy. But behind the headlines and court proceedings, there remains the personal story of a father and daughter, one that raises questions with no easy answers. Can someone be both hero and villain? Is redemption possible after profound betrayal? And how do we reconcile the good and evil that can exist within the same person? As the flames of the Clayton Mountain fire revealed the true character of Michael Donovan, so too did the investigation that followed reveal the character of an entire community, its weaknesses, its resilience, and ultimately, its capacity for justice and perhaps forgiveness. The most enduring image from this case isn't Michael Donovan in handcuffs or the evidence that exposed a criminal conspiracy. It's a simple scene captured by a security camera in the prison visiting room. A father and daughter sitting across from each other, separated by more than just a table, engaged in the difficult, halting work of truth-telling. It's in that space between judgment and forgiveness, between who we present ourselves to be and who we truly are, that the real mystery of the human heart lies. And that may be the one mystery no investigation can ever fully solve. In Oak Ridge County today, people still debate the legacy of Michael Donovan. Some see only his betrayal. Others find meaning in his eventual cooperation that brought down the corruption network. The forest where the remains were found has been designated a protected area, a silent witness to the events that unfolded. And somewhere in that forest, if you know where to look, you might find a small, unmarked stone placed there by Chloe Donovan. Not a memorial for the hero who never was, but an acknowledgement of the complicated truth that even in our darkest moments, we remain human, capable of both terrible mistakes and the long, difficult work of making amends. Was justice truly served in the case of Michael Donovan? The courts have given their answer, but perhaps the more important question is whether healing was achieved for Chloe, for the community, and for Michael himself. As we look back on this remarkable case, one question remains that each of us must answer for ourselves. Can someone who has fallen so far ever find their way back to the light? Or does the ghost of who they once were, or pretended to be, haunt them forever?